Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday Twilight show. I'm your host, Michelle, and joining me tonight is an expert in the field of inclusion. Together, we will discuss the challenges involved in effective inclusion provision and ways to overcome them for the good of our students. Is inclusion just a buzzword? What are the myths? What are the realities? Stay tuned.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our show tonight. And tonight we're exploring inclusion. Is it a buzzword, or is it something that we really should consider, which we are considering, to be honest? This is something that all schools, I believe, take seriously. So tonight we just want to explore that and talk about the ways we should approach it, the consideration that we should give it, and the successful ways in which we can maneuver inclusion in our schools to make sure that all our young people benefit. So before we begin with the questions, and before I introduce my lovely guest, I'm just going to give us a brief update on the historical context and development of inclusion. So I've done a couple of shows on this before. However, I am conscious that I have barely scratched the surface of what is a complex and a very important part of any school structure. So tonight we want to look at what it truly means and what level of work is required by the Sencos behind the scene. So we've talked about inclusion. Now tonight, I'm going to speak to someone who can give us more insight into the level of work that this demands. So inclusive education aims to educate students with SEN alongside their peers in mainstream schools, following the same curriculum to meet their diverse educational needs, physical, cognitive, social, and psychological development. So this approach involves placing all students, regardless of their individual challenges, into age-appropriate general education classes within their local communities, providing them with education, interventions, and support. And what this approach does, it prioritizes inclusivity, ensuring the participation of all students in mainstream settings, fostering access to higher quality education and interventions, and of course, maximizing their potential in academic and daily life endeavors. And that's taken from the Historical Development of Inclusive Education in the UK, published in June 2024. So without further ado, I am going to welcome tonight's guest. And I am so pleased to say that this is another very special guest. I'd like to welcome her to our Twilight show, and that is Miss Marie Dennis. Marie began her career in social care and then transitioned into education after university. Her own personal experiences in school inspired her to work in inclusion and has remained driven by her desires to address the high rates of exclusion affecting particular student groups. She currently serves as an assistant head teacher and director in inclusion. Marie is committed to ensuring that every young person has the support needed to thrive within and outside of formal education. Marie, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so glad that you've made it online as well. And I know the term is particularly busy, so thank you so much for sparing the time to be with us. So those of you already online, thank you for joining as well. Wilhelmina, thank you so much. Do stay tuned. Remember to call in or send us a message by downloading the Podbean app. We'd love to hear your comments. We'd love to get some of your questions. I'm going to take a short break for or sponsors. And then when we come back, we're going straight into the questions. Do stay tuned.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads, no distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
Hi secondary school teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded programme helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering math circles across the UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
Need a smarter way?
And there we have it. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining. Remember to download the Podbean app so that you can also participate. I'd love to hear from you. Marie, welcome again. And we're going straight into the questions so we could get as much done as possible. So first of all, I would like you to, so I made a very, very brief introduction, but could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey into this role of Senco? Fill in the missing bits.
Okay, so I've always wanted to. I didn't have a very good education myself. When I say I didn't have a very good education, the education system, I don't feel supported. I didn't feel supported as a child in the education system. So it was always my desire to get back into it and make a difference into the life of young people, especially those who have been excluded. And along my journey, I didn't know where I would land. I did a program called The Difference. I was working in a primary school at the time, so I've worked in various settings. I've worked in primary, I've worked in secondary, and I've also worked in. So when I was in primary, I felt like I went to primary from secondary because I felt like I wasn't hitting the hardest to reach students by the time they got to secondary. I felt like some preventative work needed to be done. So going into primary, I did lead on English for a number of years. And then I still didn't feel like I was doing enough. So then I went to work in a pupil referral unit as part of the Difference program, and it was whilst being on that program, I learned so much more about young people and the challenges that they face, and between that and say SEND in general, so in particular communication and interaction needs. So then I made the application for a job as a Senco at the school that I currently work at. Well, it's not Senco, it's Director of Inclusion. And then that led to me becoming an assistant head in this particular area.
Oh, fantastic. And I love the fact that all of this is coming from a shared experience of what some of
Yeah.
these students, yeah, experience daily. Did you notice anything different about the provision in primary as opposed to the secondary system?
Um, yes. Other than the obvious, like them being taught by one teacher each year or two teachers maximum each year, I did find that the nurturing of the students was a lot different. So there was more of a holistic approach in primary than there is secondary. I did work in year 6 for a period of time, but I did find that that was very exam driven.
Okay.
Focusing on the SATs again, which had a major impact on young people's mental health and well-being. And
Hmm.
yeah, so therefore I didn't, that was the major differences. And parental engagement in primary school is a lot different to working in a secondary school. And see, these are some of the challenges that we face. Yeah, so as I was saying, like the difference in the provision is just mostly around, the transitions and the way in which children go from one teacher to having many teachers and adjusting to the
Hmm.
different teaching styles, and not necessarily all the teachers knowing the need of the children, and sometimes those needs go unmissed. And quite often in primary, you find, and also similar in secondary, when they get to a certain age, it seems too late for the need to be identified or addressed. So, being in this role, that's the, the stance that I'm trying to take, which is similarly to my role when I was in primary school, when I led English across the school. I did look at the gaps,
Hmm.
and especially particularly around reading, and how to ensure that all children were making progress.
Oh,
So yeah,
fantastic.
I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah.
Yes, definitely. Very
Yeah.
thorough. But you mentioned that sometimes the teachers are not aware of the needs of these students. But what would cause that? Because I'm sure all the documentations would have been provided. So what are some of the barriers then that would prevent teachers from being aware of these needs?
Okay, particularly, children who are quiet can go amiss. If your behavior is not extrovert or not creating a major issue, sometimes that can cause you to go under the radar. Sometimes
Hmm.
it's also lack of, parental engagement. Not all the time parents want to come forth with information about, issues their child may have. And sometimes, yeah, those are probably one of the two
Hmm.
key things that I've identified as some of the things like now is also students who move schools a lot. Um,
Okay.
they get missed within the system.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so and that comes with housing as well now because of lack of permanent housing means that children quite often could move from one borough to another quite
Wow.
frequently.
Hmm.
So with that happening, sometimes their records don't always get to them, or sometimes even from year 6 to year 7, it can take a while before we get transition notes to
Hmm.
be able to put to identify the child's need and to work with them. So one of the things that we do now is that we do look at our transition program, and try to work closely with the primary schools to see, what are the identified needs, if there are any, and if there are children that they may be concerned about and are maybe monitoring. It's not
Yeah.
also doesn't also depend on, we do look at data, different types of data though, because it's not always just about grades, because you have high attainers, but they
Hmm.
also do have needs.
Yeah.
So
Oh, wow.
it's
Yes.
making sure that you're addressing both areas.
And ensuring that everybody's aware of those needs
Yeah.
and act upon them accordingly or address them accordingly and support
Yeah.
young people. Thank you so much for that. So, bearing all of that in mind, Marie, what does a typical day look like for you in your role? Because I don't
Okay.
think people understand the volume of work and the intensity.
Yeah.
So, can you give us some insight, please?
Okay. So typical day every day is going to be different in the world of Zen. So, a typical day for me would be meeting with my team and preparing for the day, giving them any update on any information on kids that we have, making sure that our timetables are supporting the children that we work closely with. The morning also starts with meeting students. We have things like soft start in our schools for children who struggle to go straight into lessons and have some anxiety issues. We do work closely with them in the mornings. So making sure that my team are aware and we set up our interventions and we get our interventions going. My day can result in having lots of meetings. These can go from annual review meetings to just general meetings with other colleagues within the school and working with them on strategies to work with young people. It can also be meeting with the educational psychologists. It also involves meeting with speech and language therapists who come into schools and other
Wow.
interventions like the play therapists who also we've we have employed play therapists who comes in twice a week. We have lots of different services that we work with. So
Mm-hmm.
my role involves working with external providers, also working with parents, also looking at access arrangements, making sure the kids in the higher years, like year 11, making sure that and year 11, year 12 and 13 are supported with their access arrangements, making applications for them to have the access arrangements, communicating that with their parents. And
Mm-hmm.
also communicating that with the young person, reading through educational healthcare plans, getting an understanding of individual needs, and making sure that strategies are put into place and the children are in the right interventions to support their needs. Also supporting the form tutors, the heads of year, the subject leaders, making sure that everybody's aware that that everyone is consistent in the way in which they're working with the individual students. Is also treating students as individuals and not
Yeah.
collectively. Just because they may have the same need does not necessarily mean that they need to be treated in the same way. So it's looking at what works for each individual student. It involves writing reports for them, communicating with CAMS, making referrals to different agencies. Could be the safe team, could be it could be CAMS,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
making
All the different
referrals to
agencies.
other lots of other services. Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
it's a role that never ends. There's always every day.
Sounds
There's
like
always
it.
something to do. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's always something to do.
Mm-hmm.
And just we have within our school we have a panel. Where we meet like it consists of assistant heads, but we meet to discuss our most vulnerable students and we make decisions around them collectively so that
Okay.
making sure that we're meeting the needs of our most vulnerable students as well. So yeah, it's
Fantastic. Very
quite
multifaceted.
a packed day.
Yes. And I could imagine as well, Marie, also
Yeah,
emotionally demanding because you're dealing with students with various needs,
yes,
um, including some of those
yes,
emotionally demanding ones. So, how do you make sure you secure your
yes.
own well being so that you're not pouring from an empty cup?
Yeah, that's interesting. I do so like I do play sports, so that's another way in which I keep because everybody knows how good exercise is for your mental health and well-being. I try to have a
Hmm.
good work-life balance. It's not easy. I mean, my husband might differ to what I'm saying, but I try to get as much of my work done at school as possible. Um,
Hmm.
it sometimes may involve me working quite late, but knowing that when I go home, it is family time, it is me time, and just
Good.
fitting in time where, I wind down. My team do have a go at me because I'm very much into mental health and well-being for the professionals as well. So I'm always making sure, make sure you've had your lunch, make sure you've had your break. I'm quite guilty of not always doing that, but that is something that I think is important. But whether or not I sit and have lunch, I might go for a walk in the day as part of my break. Just getting away from my desk, getting away from my area, and just
Hmm.
clearing my headspace through. And that's another way. I have line management meeting. Um, and that's another way in which, within that we do talk about, well-being as well as caseloads and jobs, but it's also a time to reflect on, and that's every other week, on mental health and well-being. Because I'm very much, as part of when I was at the difference, one of the things I was very much interested in is supervision for teachers. And I mean, my dad, God rest his soul, he worked within education and stuff like that, and he used to say, how come we are the only career path that doesn't have a profession, sorry, that doesn't have supervision per se. Like, you work in social services, you get supervision. You work, in other jobs, you get supervision. So my line managed meeting, I try to treat that as supervision and make sure that a bit of mental health and well-being is discussed, and I
Fantastic.
do the same for my team as well.
Thank you so much. So you gave us an extensive list of things that you are required to do throughout the week or in a particular
Mm.
day. What have you found to be some of the biggest misconceptions people have about what a Senko actually does? Because some people think, yeah, they just give us pupil passports. So, what are some of the misconceptions you've come across?
Okay, so I some of the things also they think that we can excuse me, sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. The Senko's role is also to assess students, which we
Hmm.
don't. So the Senko does not assess students
Okay.
directly. We can screen them for things and we can refer them on to other services. But in terms of direct assessments, we combine programs which screen students, but it's not
Hmm.
an actual assessment. People also think that we like is other than we don't just write pupil passports. We do, there's people have said things like, what do you do in your office? Like, do you just send emails? And no, again, it's writing reports, and these do take up quite a substantial amount of time, especially because I do a lot of make referrals for a lot of educational healthcare plans, and is meeting with families and getting a deeper understanding of the young person, and not just from a school perspective, but knowing them holistically and getting the context
Hmm.
from home. So people just often think, we sit there and do paperwork. That's another thing. But yes, we do paperwork, but a lot of the paperwork, the information from that has to come from teachers, has to come from parents, has to come from the young person, has to come from other
Hmm.
professionals. So we do work collaboratively, and it's not a solo role. Like, people just look at it as, oh,
Yeah.
you're the Senko, you just sitting there on your own and you just tell people what to do. But it's, we also have to upskill ourselves to know what strategies that we're putting out there for that we want other people to do. And also, I mean, I don't teach anymore at the moment directly in the classroom, but it's also putting on my teacher hat to think, because as part of my role, I used to train teachers, primary teachers,
Hmm.
once a week, working for Hillingdon School's initial teachers training program. And as part of that role, you have to put on your hat as thinking, okay, you can't just give people strategies, you have to make sure that they work. So, even doing a bit of team teaching, going into the classroom and making
Hmm.
sure that the training provided for the staff is one that is going to be effective. And it's not just training for, the sake of delivering something, but making sure that is impactful and they're able to implement the strategies and know how to implement the strategies. Because people think, oh, you just send this information, Senko's just
Exactly.
send information and
Yeah.
they don't work. That's the idea. You just send us the strategies, but you don't know if it works. So, we do. I'm very much about training and making sure and having an understanding that the training that's provided will have an impact for the teacher and
Yeah.
also for the success of the young person.
Fantastic. And, this should be the notion across the board. It should
Yeah,
not really be a siloed approach in your setting, but hopefully that's what's happening across the board. I do know for a fact that sometimes when we get requests from the Senko department asking for information about students, as teachers, we sometimes delay our responses because we think,
yeah,
oh, another bit of paperwork. But I guess it's so essential for us to do that so that you can
yeah,
provide the right, yeah,
yeah.
support for children. Now,
Especially if
can you
you referred some. Sorry, I was going to say,
go ahead?
especially if especially if you referred a student Someone might refer a student to me, but I need extra information to be able to move forward
Mm-hmm.
with what I need to do for that young person. And if we don't work together
Yeah,
collaboratively, then
it won't be
I
effective.
can't. Yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
Senco can't do their job. So yeah.
Yeah. So can you share with us a moment when you felt truly successful in your role? Because we know it's a challenging one, and a moment
Mm.
when you felt completely overwhelmed. So give us the human side of it.
Okay. So when have I been? Well, a couple of successes I'd probably share is, when you do a staff training and
Mm-hmm.
people really appreciate and they get something from it, and they've said, like the last one was the feedback was, this is one of the best trainings um that we've had, and we're beginning to understand and you see in the changes in people's the way in which they work with the young people, and you can see the strategies being implemented. Like that to me is a success
Mm-hmm.
for it. Another success is when I first started and I did about 12 educational healthcare plans in 1 year. I mean, for the last 2 years, and all of those children received their plans. And I think for me, that was a big success because I felt like these students have gone through so much of their life, but this was needed. And, it's taken me to come in from year 7 right up to year 11 to put
Mm-hmm.
that in place. Another success is also when we had a child who wasn't necessarily, this wasn't the right setting for him,
Okay.
for them, sorry. And I was able to work with the family, work with the local authority, and the student is now in a setting where they're able to thrive. And because you find that a lot of students can be placed in a setting where it's not actually the
It's
right
not fit for
setting
them. Yeah.
for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Overwhelm. Ugh, I don't know. And I'm not saying that like I'm saying that humbly. Like some days when there's just too much to do, like literally, and you've just got to meet deadlines upon deadlines. When you get consultations from the borough requesting that you take students, and I can get like 30 consultations, and
Mm-hmm.
have to meet a deadline of within 2 weeks, and that involves reading a lot of EHCP plans and making a decision whether this is the right provision and responding for it. So the paperwork can very much be overwhelming because I like to meet deadlines. So sometimes that means putting additional pressure on myself. But I've learned to prioritize as well. Like if I have to meet a deadline, then something has to take the back burner. And I think that's what I can find sometimes overwhelming because I see everything within my job as important, but is thinking, okay, Marie, what's important right now that cannot be done next week, and
Yeah.
just making those decisions. So it's meeting some of the
Fantastic.
deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
To minimize the burden and the pressure and the last minute rush to get make
yeah,
decisions. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
fantastic. Thank you so much, Marie. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're
Okay.
going to look at the provision as it is now, and is it fit for purpose or is it just a tick box exercise? We're also going to explore how leadership teams could be more strategic in supporting SEN provision. Those of you who are online, those of you who are listening on whatever platform, thank you so much for joining. And do remember to download the Podbean app so that you may call in, ask a question, or just make a comment. Do stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
Hi, secondary school teachers. We're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded programme helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering math circles across the UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
Need a
Okay, welcome back, everyone, in the second part of our show tonight. Marie will be leaving us shortly, so we'd like to get as many questions answered as possible. So tonight we're talking about inclusion, whether or not it's just another buzzword. We're looking into the work behind the scenes, the provisions that are being made, the gaps, the extent to which teachers are involved as well or not involved. We talked about the day-to-day provisions. We talked about the day-to-day work of a Senco, and Marie gave us a long list of things that she needs to get done day to day, and she didn't find too many things overwhelming, which is really good to know. So now we're going to continue and talk more about policies and some of the practical things that are happening in our school system. So welcome again, Marie.
Thank you.
So we're going straight into the question I mentioned before we went on that short break. Do you feel that mainstream schools are truly inclusive, or is it more of a tick box exercise?
Well, I like to think that it's more than a tick box exercise.
Mm-hmm.
I try to make it. I can only speak for where I am.
Yeah.
We do try to make it an inclusive environment. We've just done a whole therapeutic thinking training with staff to try and improve inclusivity. We have like race equality teams as well. You know, we try to make our school as inclusive as possible. And I do think we're, everywhere there's going to be more steps to take, but we do the best that we can.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, if I'm going to speak generally about education in general, majority of the schools, it is still a tick box exercise. I feel as though, having children within the education system as well, I do think that if parents, as a parent, I speak, if you're not careful, the schools still just do things to say that it is done rather than always following through.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know policies and procedures, then your child can slip through the net. And sometimes it's just like, okay, they say, for example, this child has got dyslexia. So, for instance, I want to talk about a personal issue, but I know a child who had possibly parents thought they had ADHD, not in my setting, but another setting.
Mhm.
Parent thought that the child had ADHD, spoke to the school. The school did a dyslexia test, said, no, they're high attainer, blah, blah, blah. This was in year
Mhm.
7. Okay, he doesn't need to be on the SEN register. The parent went back again saying, look, there's lots of signs, even within school because of behaviour. Behaviour is a language of communication. The parent went back and said, they think the child's got ADHD or something. There's something that he needs to be screened or assessed for. It's taken until the child's gotten to year 10, but it's now,
Wow.
because the parent was persistent, for the child to now be going through CAMS to have an ADHD screening. Now, if the school didn't just tick the box initially, maybe the child and had done more investigation, been more curious about what was going on, and maybe listened to the parent more, then you would have seen they probably would
Mhm.
have picked up on some of the needs earlier on. So I don't think all schools. I like to say our school tries to.
Yeah.
I don't think all schools are at that point where they're meeting. They're trying to meet the needs of the children, and it's just a tick. It's just a tick box. And I think also we got to recognise that teachers, leaders, education is quite a busy system. People are worried about progress data, people getting through
Mhm.
GCSEs, trying to get through the day. The needs are really high at present, especially since COVID. I don't like to mention COVID, but since post COVID, we still got, we've got loads of children who's EBSA, emotional school-based avoidance. We've got loads of children who, the anxiety levels of young people are really high. There's more children with autism. So
Yeah.
it's, and not understanding what these needs are because they're new to teachers as well. So it's like, okay, what is this? And it's trying to help educators understand the needs and how to support children, because I think that's where then the tick box doesn't happen, where people have a better understanding of how best to support individual students or understand what the
Mhm.
different needs are and what they entail. So, that's, and I think if when that parent had asked, when that child was in year 7, if they had understood about a bit more about ADHD, etc., then maybe they would have looked for something different and didn't always think academic,
Okay.
because people think need and they just think, oh, academic, they're underachieving. But there's also other things that,
Yeah.
communication and interaction needs, like all of these, is just having a better, it's just increasing our knowledge, I think, and
Yeah.
then we'll have less tick boxes.
So do you think it's the internal structures that create these barriers, or external factors? Do you think it's the schools that are not equipped, or do you think it's when they source it outside of the school where they have the issues
Do you know,
or
it's a
the
bit of both.
delays?
It's a
Okay.
bit of both, because I feel like schools are not equipped. It's because schools don't have the resources to be fully equipped.
Mhm.
You know, like there's budgets that people are working within, so they can't always access other services, and that's where the external factors come in. Like the accesses. Okay, so something like CAMS, we're waiting a 2 year, 18 months, 2 year waiting. That
Wow.
child in year 10, if they're put in for a CAMS referral and we're waiting 2 years, we're looking at they're in year 12. But it's also about, and then schools have to wait for money in order to put in resources. And they won't
Mhm.
get the money unless they have the diagnosis or they've done the educational healthcare plan. And, it's a bit of like a vicious cycle, because even where schools want to do more, their hands are tied because of lack of resources.
Yeah, which is
And
such a shame. And I think it's important for people to understand this, because sometimes parents do complain that the school is not doing enough or the school hasn't done anything, and they've raised these issues for such a long time. But it's important that we all recognize that there are external factors as well that
yeah,
impact on progress.
yes, definitely.
Um, and so, since we're on that topic, how can leadership teams then be more strategic in supporting SEN provision? Because, yes, we have these barriers, but how can leadership be more strategic in maximizing what they have or what they have access to?
Okay, so it's also recognizing that send is everybody's responsibility. Just like we say safeguarding is everybody's responsibility, it is thinking that send is everybody's responsibility. So send supporting, everything's not just on Senko. So that's where we're working strategically. We have to be working collaboratively as leaderships. So in terms of attendance, we have to be working with attendance through teaching and learning. What can each leader, senior leader,
Mhm.
do based in their particular area to support send. So recognizing that the thread of send needs to be in everything. The thread of send needs to be in teaching and learning. So when we're delivering um, CPDs on teaching and learning, SEND has to be a part of that. It's weaved into everything. So then, therefore, everybody sees it as a part of, it's not a separate thing. Oh, that's it, that child SEND or that child SEND. So it's all automatically the SENDCO's responsibility. No, that child SEND is everybody's responsibility. And how can we work collaboratively to ensure that everybody's helping to meet the needs of that child as well as if they would do for safeguarding, because safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. So it's trying to, if that comes from the top, then everybody, it can weave down into the middle leaders, into the teachers, even to the support staff. Everybody recognizes that a child with SEND, it doesn't just come to my door. They can go to anybody's door and be supported in the same way. So it's upskilling people. That's how
Yeah.
I see it. Like strategically, we need to upskill everybody in our different areas. If it's attendance, you know, it's not just attendance of SEND, like it's SEND's
Mhm.
responsibility. If the child, they may have SEND, but what is the issue around their attendance? What is the issues around the behaviour? How do we work collaboratively to ensure that we can address all the issues that the students face, knowing that they're everybody's responsibility?
Thank you. And I think a more conscious effort needs to be made to ensure that that
Yeah,
happens, because sometimes it's just an add-on at the end of a CPD, or
yeah,
for the whole year, probably once. So yeah,
yeah,
it's important that just like safeguarding, it should also
yeah.
be everybody's responsibility. Welcome,
Yeah.
Penny and Mrs. Rowe. Welcome. Thank you for joining. If you wish to make a comment, please go ahead and do so. And so, Marie, as she mentioned earlier, that in order to keep on top of things and in order to secure her own well being, she does lots of physical activities. So, she'll be leaving us shortly to go and do just that. But before you go, Marie, what
Yeah.
advice would you give to someone just starting out as a Senko? Now that you've experienced it, what are some of the pitfalls you would encourage them to avoid and how to navigate this massive role?
Okay. I would say create a network for yourself. So that if you've just started in the role, make sure you're speaking to other Senkos in other schools and being a part of a Sen network team. That's something that I did straight away. Make sure that you do the course and you have an understanding of how Send works. You know that sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah. Because it
You're
keeps
giving
breaking out.
advice.
So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if anybody can if I'm still on. So yeah, just
Yes,
making
you
sure that
are.
you've got a network around you. Yeah, making sure that you've got a network around you, make sure you're working collaboratively, make sure that you do the send course, and make sure you upskill yourself in the different areas of need, so that you know the advice that you are giving. Don't feel like you can do all on your own. Make sure that everybody's involved and included when in the work that you're doing with the young person. Um, have a good work-life balance. Don't think that you have to try and achieve everything in one day, because it's impossible, and the work is ongoing. It's going to be
Mhm.
ongoing, and rather than overwhelming yourself and trying to complete everything all at once, s- know how to prioritize and know when to say no also, and bounce things back. Make sure you get support from your senior leadership team. I sit on the senior leadership team. Make sure you get support from your head. Make sure that everybody is aware of what you're doing and how you
Mhm.
intend to, that your vision, that's the word I'm
Yes.
looking for. Make sure your vision is very clear and that people are on board with your vision and the journey that you are taking your department on. like make sure that your TAs feel fully supported by you, because teaching assistants are very important in terms of their role. They may be support staff, but their role is very significant to the inclusion department. So making sure that they feel supported um, by you as well, and making sure that they're a part of it. Some of the decisions that are being made for the young people, have team around a child. Like I do that sometimes if there's a child and we struggle, have a team around the child, like
Yeah.
have their teachers, like I have SEM briefings, all the teachers that teach that child have to come. We have to figure out what strategies together, because don't think that you have to come up with all the ideas, because what I've learned in this role is that I don't actually teach these children. So I have to go and I have to make the teachers understand that as well. Like you're telling me about this child, but I don't actually teach them. I know
Mhm.
as much as what you probably know more about them than me, because you engage with them on a regular basis. So it's coming together to know that actually the work that we're doing has to be collaborative, because you as a Senko, you know the children, but you don't know everything about the children because you're not daily in the classroom daily with them. So it's making sure that everybody is supporting you and the journey that you're on.
Fantastic. And that is some good advice for anybody who is considering a role in Senko. And also, I think, continued professional development, because,
Yeah.
education is a very dynamic field and everything is constantly evolving. So that's also so important. Marie, thank you so much for giving
You're
us some
so
insight
welcome.
into the day to day role of Senkos, because we talk about inclusion a lot. But it's so important for us to understand the work that goes on behind the scenes, and also to raise awareness of the support
Yeah.
that you need from all of us as teachers as well. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are online, for those of you who are listening via other platforms, continue to stay tuned. Thank you for staying with us. And I do look forward to some comments as well. So don't hold back. You can share your own experience of inclusion in your own setting, and you could perhaps ask a question. Marie will be leaving us shortly, but I will do my best to answer based on the information that we've gathered so far. So we're going to take a break for the news. When I come back, I will just sum up what we've learned tonight and the way forward. Thank you once again, Marie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
Hi, secondary school teachers. We're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering maths circles across the UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
As the summer term begins, so does exam season. So The Guardian has chosen to focus on the topic of access arrangements, in particular the idea of extra time. The piece begins with the stark fact that in England alone there are more than 600,000 of the arrangements and poses the question, how can schools keep up? The aim of access arrangements is to remove barriers and provide a level playing field for all pupils sitting exams such as GCSEs and A-levels, as well as other qualifications. But the article says that the numbers of pupils who now have these arrangements in place has risen significantly. According to exam regulator Ofqual, the number of approved access arrangements was up 12.3% on the previous year in 2023-24 at 625,000. But that pre-pandemic there were only 460,000 arrangements in place. Figures are rising in Scotland and Wales too. The increase may relate to an increase in anxiety and improved identification of pupils with SEND since the pandemic. The article goes on to outline the different types of access arrangements, including the use of smaller rooms, one-to-one invigilation, and the use of scribes or laptops, as well as extra time. According to Ofqual, in 2023-24, 3 in 10 candidates were awarded 25% extra time. The Guardian says it is of particular concern that in private schools the proportion of students with additional time is almost 42%, compared to 26.5% in state secondaries, and it questions whether this is evidence of some schools gaming the system. The article also highlights the additional costs schools face in supporting the arrangements, including extra invigilators at a time when budgets are already tight. Other issues include finding the extra space needed whilst running the rest of the school as normal. One school mentioned in the article said it had told admin staff to work from home for 6 weeks in order to make space. Full details, including comment from Ofqual, JCQ, unions and the Department for Education, can be found in the full article online. Schools Week reports that 79 schools have withdrawn from the Free Breakfast Club trial, with many citing inadequate funding. The Labour government in England announced 750 early adopter primary schools had opened this week, providing 30 minutes of free childcare and a healthy start for about 180,000 children. But Schools Week says 79 schools who were on a published list in February are now not taking part. One Academy Trust CEO said 2 of the Trust schools had withdrawn because it currently isn't financially viable, and that there was a funding gap that was considerable. Other head teachers who made comment in the article gave similar reasons for their withdrawal. The Shadow Schools Minister said the scheme was another chaotic and mismanaged announcement from the Department for Education, but the government said some movement was always expected. Documents about funding for the trial show a one-off £500 set-up payment, a lump sum of £1,099 to cover start-up staffing, and then 60p per pupil per day, with free school meal pupils attracting an extra 78p. Further details and comment can be found on Schools Week online. In Namibia, the BBC reports that new President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah has scrapped university fees from 2026. Addressing lawmakers, Nandi-Ndaitwah said that students would pay no registration or tuition fees at all public universities and technical colleges. However, she did say that there would be no significant extra funding, which raised questions about the feasibility of the scheme. The only contribution as families and students for now will be towards accommodation and other costs, she said. Primary and secondary education is already free in all Namibia's public schools. Further details can be found on the BBC News website at bbcafrica.com. FE Week features a new report on Level 2 apprenticeships, which urges the government to scrap them and replace them with foundation apprenticeships. Professor David Phoenix, Vice-Chancellor of London South Bank University, wrote a policy paper for the Higher Education Policy Institute. In it, he argues that apprenticeships in their current form are encouraging employer investment in higher level skills at the expense of entry levels. He also says evidence suggests that Level 2 apprenticeships have not offered high quality education and training, nor been sufficiently accessible to potential learners. He said the government's decision to introduce foundation apprenticeships, due to launch this autumn, presents the opportunity to address the situation. Changes to the system, he says, would free up funding so it could be used in a more strategic and nuanced approach. Full details and comment on the report, the new apprenticeships themselves, and issues around funding can be found in FE Online. Finally, the BBC reports that a primary school in Aberdeenshire had to close for a week after a single rat was found. The rat forced 125 pupils to learn from home whilst a deep clean was carried out. The rat was not available for comment. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Thank you so much for that, Joe Fox, and ending on the story of the rat who's seeking some kind of education as well. That was so funny. Welcome back, everyone. And tonight we're talking about inclusion. Is it just a buzzword? What is it like for Senco's behind the scenes? And we had our guest on earlier, Marie, who outlined some of the challenges, but also some of the successes, especially when young people do get the support that they so deserve. And just listening to the first item of that news, which really suits tonight's program, actually, talking about access arrangement and the growing needs of our students post-pandemic, and also because SEN provisions are now being streamlined and are being identified earlier, we now have the knock-on effect where the schools are not equipped to deal with these or to support our young people appropriately. Lack of infrastructure, lack of classroom spaces, and lack of human resources as well to meet the needs of our young people. So some of these issues are outside of the school's remit, and they go back to our government and their policies, our local government as well, and making sure that they prioritize these areas of need within education so that all our young people could have access. Another interesting thing as well that Joe mentioned is that in the private school, the number of students who have these arrangements is significantly higher than in our public schools. And that's another social issue, I think, and the disparity and the lack of equity in terms of access. So lots of things to look into if we want to make sure that our education system is truly inclusive. Then it's important that those who are in charge of education, those who are in charge of the government policies, that they really sit down and talk this through properly with the experts who are Senco leads, teachers, head teachers, and not just sit in some glass office and make these decisions without truly understanding what's happening in our education system. So we can all agree that education has come a long way since the Education Act of 1944. And in every single decade, it changes, it evolves to meet the needs of the society. In our current context and implementation, approximately 1.4 million students in English schools have SEN. And then the question is, how many of these students are really benefiting from the provisions, or how far-reaching are these provisions to ensure that every single child gets the support that they need? Inclusive education is not only a legal obligation, but it's also a social commitment to dismantling barriers and promoting equity. And Marie mentioned that earlier on as well in our discussion when she said it should be everybody's responsibility, just like safeguarding. And we should all recognize that it's a collaborative effort and it's a social commitment to dismantle barriers and promote equity. And inclusion here, we're talking about race, we're talking about neurodiversity as well, and anything disabilities, otherwise physical, mental, whatever it is, we're talking about inclusion on all levels. We also need to make sure that our teachers are equipped through informative research-led CPDs to make sure that teachers feel confident enough and empowered enough to support their young people in their classrooms, because inclusion is about making sure that all learners are in the same classroom, getting the same diet, but the lessons are adapted and differentiated to suit the individual needs. Teachers need to know how to do that effectively. Another issue I'm aware of is the lack of support teachers in some instances where, because of budgeting concerns or constraints, we cut back on the number of support teachers we can actually have in our classrooms. And then that causes a knock-on effect, because then the teacher has to deal with the other 25 students and the other 5 or so students with SEN needs, all on his or her own. So I think it's so important that when we think about our school's budget, we take into account our SEN register and the provision that needs to be made there to ensure that the provision is effective and to make sure that teachers are supported, parents are supported, and of course the local community, which will then impact on our society in general. According to the Act, schools are responsible for providing an appropriate education for all, ensuring access, participation, and achievement regardless of need. Now, it says schools are responsible, but schools also need to be able to access the resources needed, and sometimes that is outside of their remit. And therefore, it takes somebody else to provide for the schools and to provide the budget and the funding that's needed to make sure that the appropriate education is for all. And I've done a show before on alternative provision. And because sometimes in mainstream schools, we are not equipped or we do not have the resources to meet the needs of these students, we quickly pass them on to the alternative provision setting. And we expect them to have the solutions and to fix the problems. And then the students are returned to mainstream, and in no time, they are sent right back to the alternative provision. So it takes collaborative effort. This inclusiveness is all of us. We're all involved: parents, teachers, head teachers, middle leaders, senior leaders, you name it, the government. We're all involved in this process to make sure that we do not shortchange our young people. And Marie, our guest, mentioned earlier that she developed this interest in inclusion because of her own experiences in school. And I've had other guests who've expressed the same things, where they felt as though the teachers weren't equipped to handle their situations. And as a result of that, they were excluded for things that could have been avoided and things that could have been dealt with locally within the school. So let me pause now to say thank you all for tuning in to Teachers Talk Radio in today's Twilight show. I do trust and hope you have gained some insight into the world of inclusion and the behind-the-scenes hard work and dedication of our Sencos. It is not easy. It is sometimes overwhelming. We know that education is a dynamic field, and we must keep abreast of the changes. In order for us to be effective, we have to continue to learn ourselves. Inclusion is not just a buzzword. It's an essential aspect of education, and care must be taken when developing inclusion policies. Those of you who have joined, those of you who are online, those of you who are listening from other platforms, please continue to tune in and join the education discussion in the next fortnight on our Twilight show. Hopefully, I'll be able to interview an international head teacher, and we talk about some of the challenges there in the international setting for those of you who might be considering moving abroad to continue your teaching career. So do stay tuned, join the discussion, and have a lovely evening.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.